right, everybody, welcome to how to create a demo environment and some of the fun that's involved with that. So I'm going to try and go through my steps quickly, which I probably should have brought up a PowerPoint here. Where'd you go? There you are. And good luck that this is going to present on the right screen. Oh, look, it did. How joyous. Okay. So I'm Fred Zelhart with CodaBears. What we're doing, hopefully, is going to go over how to create a demo environment. That was the general question. I'm actually going to show you how to do a demo environment as well as how to do a restore of an existing environment. So you might want to take your prod into pilot, for example. Caleb's going to expand on that. He's done some automation with that. And then we have Mark Wonsil at the end talking about how to do things with cloud environment and how that might change differently. So when you create a demo environment, and this would be the Epicor training database, or they call it the demo database. It's the one with the Epic 06, Epic 02, and Calvin, I'm going to mute you so we don't hear keyboard. So if it says Epicor Education, those types of things, that's the demo database. Now that uses a SQL script to run, and that script takes about 20 minutes on a decent SQL server to run. Your next step after adding that demo database is add your instance, add your license, create your task agent, log in and run reports. Why do you want to log in? Make sure you can log in. Why do you want to run reports? Make sure the reports got installed. So that's the gist of how to do a demo environment. So if I'm not going to go through the whole thing because that would take 20 minutes, but in general, what you're going to do is go to your admin console, go to database server manager, go to your SQL server, right click, add a new demo database. It's that easy. And when you come in here, you can give it a name like FZ demo. The trick on this is you need to go to your deployment server. So you're going to browse out. You're going to go to your Epicor install folder, and you want to go to the version level. So I went to Epicor ERP11, ERP11 1.200.0. That's what you want in there. Okay, don't go to your client installs. Don't go to your local clients. Don't go somewhere wacky. You want to be at that root level. When you hit OK, which I'm not going to do, you'll see it'll kick off. You may have to actually hit a start button. It'll start playing the scripts, and you can watch the progress through there. It does take a little bit for it to start up, so don't be, you want to be patient for it. Just give it a little bit of time to run through so that it'll kick it off. Once it kicks it off, it's very obvious that it's running, so it'll be fine from there. So how is that different from copy an existing data environment? And yes, I'll have these slides out there, don't worry about it. When you copy an existing environment, and I'll run through this one, we're going to make a database backup. And you're going to want to do a full copy-only database backup. The reason you want the full, you want the entire database. The reason you want the copy-only, don't break your database chain. And if you're not familiar with what that means, go to the CodaBears website, look at our white papers. I talk about the different types of databases and how to back them up, things like that. You're going to want to stop your task agent and instance if you're restoring over the top of an existing instance. So you want to make sure you stop your task agent, then stop your Epicor application instance so that nothing is running. Then restore your backup in SQL. If you're doing a new instance, you'd go and register the database. Otherwise, if you're restoring over an existing, you want to regenerate the data model. The reason you always want to regenerate the data model, I tell people do this even if you know there was no database changes. It's a good step to always do. It doesn't cause any harm, other than it takes a little bit longer to do the restore because you have to wait for the data model to regen. But if you forget that step, you can have problems if there was something that was in pilot, not in prod, or in prod, not in pilot, because regenning the data model gets everything back in sync. So it's always a good step in my book to go ahead and do this. If you need to do any database changes, use a script to do that. So the reason I say use a script is so that you always make things consistent. You can fix everything up. So for example, changing the company name, turning off avaTax, getting your task agents, or not task agents, your system agents. So all of that. Patty Buchler, what if you don't check the box for copy only backup? So what's going to happen is the short version. SQL has a serial number that says this is when a full backup was made. And then when your transaction log backups are run, they know they belong to that full backup and they know the order they're done in. If you do another full backup, then you basically are writing a new serial number, and now the new transaction logs are going to be pointing to that one to use for the restore. And if you've taken this and taken it off your production server, used it to restore to pilot, and then destroyed it, now the transaction logs have nothing to restore back to. So the best you can do is before you got there or when you take another full. So it's what's called breaking the backup chain. You're welcome, Patty. Then if you're, our next step after we apply our database changes, if you need to create an instance because you're doing a new one, that's what you'd want to do. Create your task agent if you're doing a new instance. Otherwise, start up your instance in task agent if it's already there. Log in and again, verify the reports run. So I'm going to try and do this as quickly as possible. And hopefully I can follow my steps. Watch this. We'll find out. So I'm just going to go to a database on my system. And just for the heck of it, I've got a demo database here. Whoops. So I'm just going to do a task backup. And this is the handy part about it being on video. Y'all can slow this down to do whatever speed you want. And I'm just going to say this is fcemug.bak. Hit OK. I'll go to media options. I'll make sure that we do a verify and a checksum. And I believe those are the only steps I need. Now, I typically run back through these 3 tabs again. Copy only full, make sure I got my file right, media options, backup, verify, perform, and nothing on here. So I'll go ahead and hit OK. This takes just a few seconds actually for the demo database, which is amusing because it takes 20 minutes for the script to run, but I can back up and restore in about 5 minutes, which makes it kind of nice. Okay, so I've done my everything there. So I'll come in and I'll say, I want to restore a database. I'm going to go from a device, browse out to my FZEmug, hit OK. I'm going to restore it to a new database called FZEmug. I always double check this. This is my original file name from the backup. Make sure what you're restoring to is named properly. It is possible to overwrite an existing database, and it's very hard to recover from that. So double check your file names when you do that. If you're restoring over an existing database, if I were going to restore into an existing instance, I'd want to check that overwrite existing database and close any existing connections. So if I go ahead and hit OK, normally I would have gone through and double checked everything, but I'm kind of being careful. Choink, there we go. So that 20-minute script that it took to run for Epicor to create a demo database, I've got it done in a couple minutes here. So now our next steps are actually going back to our Epicor, and we're going to come into our database server. Sorry, I kind of clicked and right-clicked at the same time there. I'm going to register an existing database because I've already restored it. So I'll come in here. I'll call this FZEmug. Now, I could have also clicked my 3 dots and could have selected it from this list as well. It's kind of handy that they've got that there for you. If you know it and you can type it, pretty easy to do. Again, I'm going to browse out to my Epicor install folder, scroll down, there we go, hit OK, choink. So now my database is registered. Now, I could have done a rerun of the regen the data model. I'm going to skip that step because it's already a restore, it's already good. So now we want to create our instance. So I'm going to say add an application server. And that takes just a couple seconds for it to kick off. And again, if I would have done my SQL script, and I can talk about that, I'm kind of going quickly because I want to leave time for Caleb and Mark. So if we have time at the end, I'll come back in and talk about that SQL script. Just wanted to do this thing. This part does take, I wanted to say it took about 20 seconds to do. All right, there we go. So come into your application name. I'm going to call it FZEmug. Make sure you set your deployment version. What version are you going to? And when I click off of application name, notice my website directory changed. I'm going to choose an HTTPS binding. Why? Because NetTCP, Epicor has said, is going away. So you want to make sure that you are using things that are appropriate. Epicor, and I like to use a custom account for my application pool so that I know what's going on. If I need to lock an account, it's easy to do. Database connection, I'm going to connect my dev SQL 2019 server. This is a kicker. If you use the keyboard to change this, when you come down to test connection, it'll actually come back and tell you, hey, I wanted SQL authentication. So always check it with your mouse. My database name, I can drop this down, FC emug, test connection, boom. Admin console settings, set your username and your password for the manager. Reporting services, you would normally want to configure SSRS so that as you apply patches, you'll be okay, and then you would specify your URLs. Again, I would put my server name to my SQL server, use Windows Auth, give it the report database name and whether to create that or not. And apparently I'm showing those buttons. There we go. So I'm going to skip that, just do a deploy, hit OK. Hopefully if all is well, it goes relatively quickly. Once that's done, my next steps would actually be to go in and create the task agent, which if you haven't done that before, you bring up your task agent, you'll just do a file, new task agent, point it to the right instance, you should be all good. Then log in, make sure your login works, make sure your reports run. Kathy's got a question. If we want to set up a test database to upgrade and test out a new version, what's the best way to do it? That would be this way, Kathy. What you can do is you could actually copy your prod, put it into a new database, just like I did. And then if you wanted a really good test, I would probably say go to a new virtual machine and have that new version of Epicor over there. And then you could connect back to your database server and run the upgrade process and see how it works. The reason I like to do a separate server when I'm doing a test like that is, should there be any problem with having the two versions of Epicor running side by side, because it's on a separate machine, you're not going to affect your production. So typically that's always a good step, is to have a separate machine that you're going to test things on. It should be set up pretty similar to your production environment, but that way you can figure out, is this going to work or not, and what is the least amount of problems I'm going to have. A lot of people have done it against their production environment, haven't run into problems over the years. It's just what's a best practice versus what's feasible for what you're working with. You may not have IT staff, you may not have budget to do that. Is there an easy way to move your custom SSRS reports from live to the new environment? Yes, there is. That's actually from Mel, sorry, not from Kathy. So Mel, you can do that one of two ways. If there are custom reports that you've created that are using Epicor canned reports, you can just make a solution for them. So you'll make a solution for the SSRS, take that solution file, go over to your new environment, and then you'll bring those in. That will upload the reports, the RDDs, BAQs, whatever you need for those things. They'll all get over there. If you're talking from scratch reports, meaning reports that you wrote a stored procedure and you created an SSRS report to do, the short answer is no, there's not an easy way unless you buy this wonderful tool from CodaBears. The long answer is you can actually download the reports from the portal and then you can deploy them. What I prefer to do is you can use Visual Studio. When I develop my reports, I develop in Visual Studio. And then what I can do is I can just do the deployment from inside of Studio. And Studio can deploy about 50 reports in about a minute. So it's very easy to do that. And it's very easy to point it to a new environment. It will upload data sources, data connections, repoint everything and do that all at once. Third way is there is a tool from CodaBears that we've worked with to actually be able to copy from one SSRS to another. So that would also be an option. Monty, one issue I found with running versions in the same VM is that when you deploy the new base SSRS reports, you can break some of the reports in your production system. Cool, hadn't run into that yet, Monty, thank you. Usually it's, as long as, what my experience has been is as long as you're deploying into that new instance, you're typically okay. If you go backwards, so you started your new instance and let's say it was at 2021.1, and then you redeploy it, trying to redeploy it to let's say 10.2, that has ended up being a problem with the reports at times. But you're the first person I've heard that's had a problem running forward. So, all right, since this is running, I am going to turn the presentation over to Caleb because I've used up my time and let him show you how to, what he's done with automating deployment of the instance. All right, Caleb, you should be the presenter now.
All right. All right, so yeah, the steps are basically the same as what Fred had said when we're restoring our test and dev environments. Basically, stop the task agent, stop the app server, restore the database, start the app server back up, remove that production flag, and then I run the flow, the Power Automate routine, and then I start our task agent back up. So quickly go through some of the steps. I think most people know how to do this. You know, stop the task agents by right-clicking in the task agent window. Stop the application pool, and then we actually use a job that runs the restore procedure. We do nightly backups of our production server, so this routine basically grabs the latest, and then it's pointed to a specific database and restores it. It does everything that Fred had did before manually, just in a job. So once that's done, we start the application pool back up. We always click the remove production status, and then we go through and run our Power Automate flow routine. What this is just a bunch of REST calls to the application server to update the information, like Fred said, the company, any scheduled tasks, things like that will get updated. Well, we have this built so that we can hit multiple environments. So in that, when we start to run the flow, we have options to choose our app server, our external BAQ connection, what host we're actually connected to, and what name do we want to rename the company as. And then you can set up a new connection to run the flow, so you have different options when you do go to run the flow with the Azure AD connection. When it runs, you'll see lots of check boxes. And it takes, for us, it takes about 2 minutes to run the whole routine. I like to go through, use this Power Automate flow with the REST calls because it hits the business object. So any additional logic that Epicor wants to do is applied when you're doing this. If you're doing everything in SQL, you might miss some things that Epicor will do in their own triggers since it's not hitting their business logic. So that's why we go with the Power Automate flow to restore our data. And then again, start the task agent back up after everything's been run so that you can run reports. So just a quick demo. Minimize that. So when it goes, we go to run, and we're on Office 365, so this makes it a lot easier. When we set up a new connection, you can use your username and password. I will say that I missed in the presentation that there needs to be what they call an on-premise gateway, which is just a service that needs to be running on a server. It can be downloaded from Microsoft's website. Basically, it gives your Office 365 access to your server without having a direct connection to the servers. So we have options to change servers to the connection, and then we get to choose what app server we want to update. I'm not going to actually run it. I don't have anything to actually restore, but when it does run, this is kind of the routine that it runs. So it runs through to set some variables. I then do the updates. I update companies, so I get all the companies, then I loop through all the companies and update each company. Sometimes there's specific things we want in each company, so we do a switch on each company, and depending on the case, we do certain things. And then we update workstations, we disable the tax connect, or actually in some environments we actually just point the tax connect to a different environment. Some of the other things that we do, we update our external BAQ connections, schedule tasks, so we disable everything that's not critical, and then if we need it, we'll enable it later. We point some of the system agent file directories to a specific directories on each server, and then we clear the registration agents because those come over from production and are no longer applicable in our dev environments. And then if we have any rules, we typically clear those out so that just the task agent that's connected to that app server is running the tasks. Yeah, so in a nutshell, that's how we restore and update our test and dev environments.
And Caleb, we have a question from Mike. What does production flag do?
Production flag, that's as far as we don't actually use it, but you can use it in BPMs to say, is this my production instance? There's options in your conditions in your BPM condition widget to say if it's a production instance or not. There isn't any, it's just a flag in the system to say if it's production or not.
It's actually a nice way in the system to mark which one's your live environment. So if you're sending automated emails like a purchase order off to a vendor, when you're in the test system, you don't want those POs to go out. So you can do a condition on your automated rules that says if this is live, let it run. Otherwise, stop the action right here. So it's an easy way to set all of your BPMs to which one should fire when you're in production versus not.
And then I also had from Tim Coopers, will a test environment run using SQL Developer Kit for backends if it's running on another machine? And I put the answer out there. In my experience with Microsoft, which granted has been a couple of years, as long as the environment is proven that there is nothing in production on it, you can use a SQL developer license for development testing type of thing. That said, their rules change at the drop of a hat. So that's what it was the last time that I went through an audit with Microsoft. As long as there was no production database in that developer instance, they were okay with it being using a developer license for the testing and stuff. All right, anything else, Caleb, before I turn it over to Mark?
That's all I had.
All right, Mark, I'm gonna make you the presenter. And you are up, sir. And I think you're still muted, Mark.
Yep, you're right. Which screen are you seeing?
I'm seeing the blue and red and white swirls with your PTI.
All right, gotcha. And if Beth is nearby, I'm sitting from her former office, so she should recognize that. All right. Let's swap this out. There we go. How's that?
We can see your slideshow now.
Excellent. And let me move the WebEx thing. All right. So, and by the way, Caleb, that was excellent. I really appreciated that automation in there, and I'm going to keep up with that. So the first thing we want to talk about with the cloud environments is our there we go. What does Epicor offer in SaaS? Because you have different possibilities of things that you could use when you, depending on which version of the environments that you have. Then we're going to discuss private cloud real quick, and then I want to do a little DevOps, which is very just picking up where Caleb left off and talk about how do we get to the automation, taking it further, including security. So that's kind of the goal here. So the Epicor SaaS offering, there's now 3. What used to be called dedicated tenant or public cloud has been split into 3 different products. Select, which is the lowest form of cloud, SaaS, then Signature, then finally Enterprise. Select gives you your regular Epicor production database, and then there's also a pilot database. There is no test. If you buy the embedded education, you will also get a instance of that in the cloud. All of these can be reset on a ticket. However, the pilot is used 30 days before an upgrade. So when you're going from 10.1, 10.2, and your patches will all get upgraded either 30 days before or just usually the Wednesday before on a patch, so that you can do some sniff testing, smoke testing. The Signature includes everything there, but you also have the ability to delay upgrades. So on Select, you pretty much have to go when Epicor says you have to go. You can purchase the deferral, but with Signature, it comes with it. And Signature also provides that read-only database that people could use to connect things to for reporting, to get faster reporting. And finally, there's Enterprise. This is basically the replacement for single tenant. And this is an individual Azure instance that's completely yours, not just the database, but also the application server and everything. And you could actually defer your Epicor upgrades to up to 18 months. Testing and building databases and test databases and dev databases all works the same way. They're purchased separately, and they're not very expensive. It's like $250 a month at one time. I don't know what the price is now, but that's whenever you want a new refresh, you just submit a ticket and away you go. And so a lot less to do, obviously, for a SaaS offering, but I just want to make sure everyone know what was the current state of the art at this point. Then we move to the private cloud people, like Jose and some of the other companies. They decide to be in the cloud, but they want more control. And it's really no different than being on-prem. You do your own deployments, and all the things that Fred and Caleb showed you are going to work just as well if you're running your own instance in Azure and AWS and GCP. There are third parties out there, if you search for them, who will actually host Epicor for you and do things as if it was close to the enterprise version of Epicor SaaS. And so in the same situation, they're the ones that are going to set up your stuff, and that's all going to be priced accordingly. So if you do decide to go cloud without Epicor, those are your options. Then the last thing I wanted to talk about is DevOps. And DevOps is kind of a thing that if anyone watches me on Epi users gets sick of me mentioning, but it's one of the Epicor ideas that I have out there. Talk a little bit about managing code and scripts, infrastructure as code if you're a private person, private cloud person, and then finally a deployment demo I want to show you. So real quick, if you want to read a really good book about what DevOps is, I highly recommend this one, The Unicorn Project by Gene Kim. He's the guy who's also behind the DevOps handbook. But if you've ever read the book, The Goal, about manufacturing, for those manufacturing people, this is very much inspired and in the same style as that book. And he even credits it earlier on in the book. So it's an easy read, it's a novel, but it teaches you about dev instances and how to coordinate your developer work with your operations. And that's what really DevOps is all about, is developing a set of practices. It doesn't have to be any particular software or anything, but a set of practices to move things from development, from test into production in a fine manner. Because over time, our dev and our ops people have gotten kind of siloed, just as we've seen you see in the rest of your business, where sales doesn't talk to manufacturing, doesn't talk to purchasing. This is to solve that problem in IT. This is also a great book, Emily Freeman's DevOps for Dummies. She's also taking DevOps in a whole new thing. So if you ever get a chance to see her talk, she's very entertaining. There's a lot of good YouTube videos with her. She used to be with Microsoft, but is now at AWS. All right, One thing I wanted to bring up, is since this is really a talk about automation that I'm kind of carrying along, all the things that you have seen done in the administrative console can be done at a command line. And there is a book, a technical reference guide called the Command Line Tools Guide, which lets you build task agents, start task agents, shut down task agents, run data, rebuild your data model, all from the command line. So if you're getting to the point where you really want to script everything, this is a great resource. It takes these big, hairy, ugly config files to pass, but this is pretty much how Epicor runs SaaS behind the scenes, and they've released these tools, and all the information is in the book on how to use them. It's not the easiest read, but once you kind of get the hang of it, it's very useful. All right, so back to the people who do stuff in the cloud, a private cloud. One of the things that is very popular with cloud people is infrastructure as code. And one of the promises here with infrastructure as code is, or in the cloud, I should say, is I want to be able to build a test server, do a bunch of stuff, and then shut it down. You know, when I'm on-prem, I got to find a server that's available that has some root space on it, and then build a virtual machine on it and do all my work. In the cloud, you could do this with code. So this is Bicep is the language that Azure uses to build ARM templates, which builds all the resources behind. And I just want to mention that this is really popular and up and coming. So if you wanted to whip up a dev machine or a test machine, and you have certain requirements, it all can be put in code. It's all the exact same things that you see at the command line, or I'm sorry, in the UI, and you just submit it, and the whole thing is built. That builds the, your Windows server and your SQL server, but then you need to install all those certain things that Epicor requires for IIS and certain services. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with desired state configuration, but PowerShell has this module called desired state configuration, where it's a very declarative script-like way, again, to say, hey, I want this server to have this software. I want you to install these roles, and you just let it run. And moreover, not only does it do it at install time, it runs about every 15 minutes to make sure those things are all still running and all still installed in case somebody accidentally deletes them. I just want to point that out. So one of the problems with IT a lot is there's a lot of tribal knowledge. We were talking before about lack of documentation, and my saying is the best documentation is automation. So if you can script something, then somebody knows how to do it. If I write a Word document and tell people how to do it, it'll be okay, but it's going to fall out of date and I'm going to forget to update it. But if I'm always updating the automation, people can follow along and see exactly what I did and do it faster and without any errors. I think when Fred was doing the restore, and you want to make sure that all that stuff, you can hard code those things, those checks in there, so that you're not accidentally overwriting that database or doing something you really don't want to do. And again, do it a lot quicker. So I highly recommend everything be put into source control. If you're a cloud person, you could use the Bicep files and keep it in GitHub. All right, so I'm going to do a little test deployment just to show you what this might look like. And just for the on-premers, to keep you from falling asleep, what I have is a test, just a simple ASP.NET program that just really does nothing. And what I have over here is that home page. I'm going to come over here on the home page. I'm going to edit it. I'm going to say welcome Kinetic users. All right. I'm going to go back here and I'm going to show you what this is. This is in GitHub. There's a section called GitHub Actions. And GitHub Actions, like Caleb and Power Automate has, there's something called a GitHub runner that can be run locally on my machine. So on this particular VM I have here, this is a little thing, Hyper-V server running on my laptop, very on-prem right here, right? Whenever GitHub sees that I push something to the main branch of the code, I'm going to execute these jobs. It's going to run on my self-hosted runner, which is running on that little VM on my laptop here. I'm going to check out the code. I'm going to make sure .NET is installed on that machine. I'm going to, I just put this in here, a little debug to find out what folder I'm in. I'm going to build my system, but this is the part that's interesting. After I do the build, I'm going to copy the results. This is just plain commands that you would type at the command line. So remember before, all those Epicor commands could be put right in here, including all the parameters if you build them into this code. So here I'm stopping the IIS server. I'm just copying this folder to this folder, forcing everything to overwrite, and then restarting it. So I'm going to come back over here, and I'm going to commit this change. Just give it a name. And then if I come back over here to my GitHub Actions, you'll see my build and deploy is running. And all those steps that I was talking about, it's going to do real quick. Usually this runs in about 15, 20 seconds. Here it is. It's setting up .NET Core. It already exists. It's going to display the local directory where it was. It's going to build .NET. It's going to publish, and then it's finally going to copy it. Now, so GitHub, right, is definitely, all that source code was in the cloud. It's definitely not here local on my machine. And these are nothing but PowerShell commands. And it's finished and completed. So now, if all is right in the world, I refresh this web page. This should have said, welcome, there it is, welcome Kinetic users. So I was able to keep my source code, and this could be a deployment. Remember, anything I can run locally with PowerShell, I can do now in GitHub, push it down to a local environment, push it to my cloud environment. All those same commands. You could do something similar without that Caleb did within Power Automate. You would just do the same things, because in PowerShell you can make REST calls, and you could do those. I'll have all that same branching logic in there. Although I have to say I really do like Caleb's example.
Mark, I'll add that you can actually call those flows or those Power Automates from REST too.
Yes, absolutely.
You have all that logic still in the cloud and run PowerShell to run those.
That's right. That's right. And then my very last example, as I wanted to talk about the kind of in-between slot. Maybe I'm not ready for the whole cloud thing, and I still want a script that I document what I do with my PowerShell commands. And there's something called, not new, but new to the Microsoft world, called Jupyter Notebooks. And this was born out of the Python people. But within that world, they create what's called a notebook. And let me bring up a copy here. And notebooks are very interesting. This is Visual Studio Code, and there's just an extension called .NET Interactive. And what you do is you build little cells, almost like Excel, that's either Markdown, which is the just simple HTML, and then code that you can execute. And so here, this is just a little demo. It doesn't really run, but I'm saying I want to create a test instance, check for login users. So I could run a PowerShell script that does an invoke REST method that checks to see who's logged on, and back up my database, run things. I could change it on the fly. So let me do that get location again here. Just PowerShell. And what's interesting and different than a regular batch file is I could run one thing at a time, and it saves the result of that run right here in the same notebook. So when I run the backup command, I will see all the output of the backup command right here. It stays with the notebook. If I ran this right now, I don't know if that would actually, I'm not connected here, but anything I could do in PowerShell, I could do right here, and it'll display everything right along the line. So let's say I want to set up, create a dev situation. As long as you get your PowerShell written ahead of time, you can do things. Now, I say PowerShell, but these run code blocks can be C#, F#. You can display JavaScript, Custo query, which is more Microsoft's Azure query language, and SQL statements could be run right in here. So you could operate directly. I highly don't recommend it of all people to say this, but you could run SQL statements right in these notebooks against a SQL database. So just another way of automating documentation through automation. This is a little different because it's in a single book, and so only the person who has the book sees it, whereas in the GitHub, that whole history, that run history is left out there for a while, and you can see when was the last time this was refreshed, who did it, what was the result. Here, at least this gets us back to what we're used to, but it's a lot more powerful in the fact that it gives you the ability to document. You can put as much text in here about why you're doing it, what you should check out for, and then you could either run the whole book at once by doing a run all, or you could do it one at a time and make sure everything is going fine. So I just wanted to bring up that as another option for deploying it, and that ends everything for me.
And Mark, that was using Visual Studio Code with Jupyter Notebooks?
That is used, yes, but you install the extension called .NET Interactive. Here, let me bring that up there. This one.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's very cool.
And then Matthew Heck, is there any way to invoke Epicor business objects using this? I can explain more via voice if needed.
Well, so business objects, you're going to be going through the .NET framework, the old .NET framework. If you're really going to do it, I would prefer doing it through a REST call. And if you want it to be compatible with Kinetic, that's how the Kinetic web talks to the business objects, is through REST calls. So if I were to do that, I don't know I'd spend that much time doing .NET objects directly in C#. You could, you have to have access to those libraries and all the the dependencies of running the .NET over TCP. But I would definitely recommend just take the REST plunge and go that way. And I'm also a big fan of, I'd rather call all my business objects in a function, an Epicor function, and then use REST to call the function and let all the dirty work happen at Epicor. Then you're really keeping the traffic on the wire lower, and you have a lot more control over what's happening.
Excellent.
If that makes sense. Does that make sense, Matt? I hope.
Matt, I've got you unmuted if you want.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. I've long been looking for sort of this exact thing, because copying production into test or for a dev environment, it's such an involved process that I do it way less often than my end users would like. They'd like a test environment that's up to date constantly, but it's just so tedious to do all the things that you have to do in between. Backing up and restoring the database is one thing, but then going into the Epicor application itself and renaming the company to test, our company name, and then going and updating the settings in the company config to point to the proper paths for the different instance. Like, it's this whole, and I'd love just you want to update the test instance? Let me just hit this button here, give it half hour, back tomorrow, and boom, done. I don't have to do all that tedious junk.
Yep. Yeah, and Caleb has solved that problem just as easily. I mean, he's got to literally since it's open to 365, he could allow certain people to do it, you know, for people he trusts. And
Yeah, and there's also options in the flow to run SQL stored procedures. So there is that that option too, where if I believe you can run PowerShell commands and all that kind of stuff in a storage procedure. So you literally could set up a whole new environment using just one flow if you're well versed in SQL Server or stored procedures and stuff and such. But that could
or just PowerShell, yeah, or just PowerShell, because you could call vice versa, PowerShell you could call stored procedures. So yeah, it's kind of pick your shell and then go with it. Yeah.
All right, any other questions?
It's not a question, Fred, but I can vouch for, Caleb's tool. We use it quite often. There are weeks and months where we use it obviously more frequently than others, and just having that button pretty much to push makes lives easier, I think, for both Caleb and I.
Oh yeah.
As we're helping our users.
Oh, that's a very awesome tool you guys got there. Very nice.
Yep.
And maybe you could sell it to Epicor, because why should cloud users have to ask them to submit a ticket? What kind of automation could they expose to say, here, I just need this redone, give you a little front end like you guys have, and say, here, just build me a new education instance, or copy my prod to test, those kind of things. Yeah, I don't understand. I talked to them 5 years ago about it. I know there's an Epicor idea on it. Just you guys are doing it, I'm sure they could do it. I do have an unpopular opinion. I don't know if anyone's interested, but I don't think I'm to the point where I think all dev work should be done in the education database or in a specific database that is meant for that particular problem, instead of always working on production data. And what brought that to light is how many times we've seen open copies of databases hacked out in the public because a developer was using it on AWS or Azure, and they left it unlocked, and they were doing some testing and development work, but it was all real live data, and they all got exposed. And should developers be working on live data? There's, depending on your industry and with the privacy laws coming down the way they are, the ability to build a dev system is even more complicated problem. I think once we get around building instances, if there was a tool to say, here, build me an empty database with the GL and maybe some customers, and you pick and choose just the few things you need, set all the same settings, and then allow developers to create test data so they could actually run a reproducible test for upgrading, then that would be better. But I think that's our next step. I think if we could just get new instances easily done, that would be a good start. But in the future, I'd love to see more dev-friendly systems that you could spin up in the cloud that are using free services, the cheaper cloud services, do your dev work, save it to a solution, and then go back through the regular pilot process to actually work on real data. But that's just me.
What you're saying, we don't have to upload our 2 terabyte database to Epicor anymore.
Yeah, right. I mean, if I just want to work on a report, download some funky AR data, anonymize the customer names, and play around with it. Especially when I'm dealing with the third-party people, let's say Fred or Calvin or 6S or whoever, do I want them to see my production data? As if you're SOX compliant and stuff like that, how are you controlling that kind of work? So it takes some of the liability off of them and the company. So, like I said, that's down the road. Let's crawl before we're rocking or running.
Exactly. I was going to say, Mark, because we have a client that's asking us to go through that and do a SOX audit at
Yeah.
our expense. And I'm looking at that. That's up to a $90,000 audit expense.
Yeah. But if you're not using real data, you don't have to do it.
Exactly. But you need to use real data to make sure that you're getting the right results sometimes. I can't always do it with the Epicor training system.
No, and I agree with that. I think the Epicor training system's not what you want. You want to be able to pick and choose and create data for you guys to work on, and then let them do the testing and the user acceptance testing. But you should be able to create data and say, as long as it passes these tests, then I did what you said you asked me to do. And then they have to go on and use it on the real data. And if it doesn't work, then yeah, then you got to work on other things, refining that data to find those examples. I think it actually will provide better code over time, but it's getting that iterative loop going. It's going to take some work because that's not what we're used to.
Yep.
There's a couple of tools out there you can use to do what's basically data obfuscation. So what you could do is you could take a copy of production and run it through something like DDM data masking. And you say, hey, mask any fields that have, say, customer identifiers or whatever. You do have to give it a list of columns. Then you can run it through that, and then you would have technically production data, meaning you'll have the right numbers, but you wouldn't know, the vendor or the customer information because it would all be replaced with random digits and numbers. So
yeah, that'd be a great idea.
we actually had that same question come to us from internally from our organization. One of our VPs said, is there a way that we can make it so that you can't see the data?
Yeah.
And
We've actually done, we did that with a new part. There was a whole product group that we masked the part information.
Yeah.
Except for engineering and a couple, so that we didn't have too many nosy people looking in.
Yeah, we were asking IT. I mean, they said, can we get your development team to not have access to all the data? Because basically, we're, in our organization, we're a very large company, and all our development team has access to the entire ERP system because they need it, right? But at the same time, that made the CIO a little nervous. Why does developer 3 get to know exactly what our revenue is and our costs of goods and our GL account transactions and all this stuff? Yeah. Unfortunately, at the time, the only answer I could say was like, sorry, we need access because we can't write the code or fix the stuff without the access.
You're never going to get filter contracts.
Right.
Good point.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's an interesting problem to try to solve.
It is.